30 seconds, Sally.
Let's talk. Hello, welcome, and welcome to you out there. This is the Let's Talk show. I'm so happy that you joined us. We have a very special show for you today. Recently, Hurricane Sandy has devastated the east coast of the United States. Over the last few months, tornadoes have been hitting all over the Midwest. Wildfires have been breaking out all over California. In June, over 3,000 heated temperature records have been broken or at least met. And in July, the Department of Agriculture had to claim over 50 counties, 50% of the counties in the United States as disaster areas because of drought. What's going on? My guest today is Kathryn Blume. Kathryn is a climate activist who's known throughout the world. She's a writer, she's an actress, she's also a commentator on VPR television. So perhaps Kathryn can give us some light on the subject. So join me in welcoming Kathryn Blume. Kathryn, thank you for joining us. It's
Thank
so good
you.
to see you.
My
Thank you for coming.
Absolutely.
Please sit down. I have to tell you that I have been doing a show for quite a while now, and I have never, ever had a cheat card for the credentials of my guests. However, Kathryn has so many credentials that I have a cheat card.
It's payback for my not having a real job, basically.
Is that what it is?
Yeah.
Yes. So tell us a little bit about yourself. You're a writer, you're
Yeah.
a climate activist.
Yeah, I've been in theater my whole life.
You have?
Yeah, but I've been interested in many, many things outside of theater, and right now, climate change and the sort of perils of climate change have caught my attention in a pretty profound way. So I've been spending a lot of time working on those issues. But coming out of the theater, I'm very interested in doing it in a creative, entertaining, community engaging, and community building way, because I feel like we need all hands on deck.
Absolutely, and this is a way that can bring people, all of us, together and join you in this. Now, let's start from the beginning. Where are you from?
I grew up in Portland, Oregon.
Oh, you did?
Yeah.
So you're a Western girl.
West Coast girl, yeah, and I never thought I would be moving east again. I went to college on the East Coast, but after college I went back to the Northwest and thought for sure I wouldn't go east of the Rockies. But, you meet a boy and he intervenes and life plans get changed. Right? Yeah.
Yes. Now you are, let's see, you won the co-founder of the
Lysistrata Project.
Now tell us a little bit about that.
Well, in late 2002, early 2003, as the United States was ramping up to invade Iraq, I was very interested in trying to forestall that because it seemed like a pretty bad idea. And a friend of mine and I was living in New York at the time pursuing an acting career, and I heard about a group that had gotten started called Theaters Against War. And they were planning a big day of anti-war action for early March 2003. And I thought I would love to get involved and create an event for that day. And I happened to have been working on a screenplay that was a modern adaptation of this ancient Greek comedy called Lysistrata, which is a 2,500-year-old play in which the women of Greece band together to stop a war by refusing to have sex until the men quit fighting.
Oh, my goodness.
And it's a very funny play. And, the thing is, that tactic has been used in the real world many, many times, and it always works. It always works. In every place I've ever heard about, sex strikes work. So it's a saucy play, and all the men are running around. I call them, they're sort of priapically challenged. And so we decided to do a reading of Lysistrata to protest the war in Iraq. And what started out as one tiny reading in New York exploded into a day on March 3rd, 2003, of worldwide readings. We had over 1,000 readings in 59 countries, all 50 U.S. states on 6 continents.
Now, was that before Facebook?
Yes. It was pre-social media, so it was before Facebook, before Twitter. Basically what happened is we put together a website that was a how-to kit for doing a reading. And my friend Sharon, who I did this with, Sharon Bauer, her husband at the time was a graphic designer. So he created a logo for us, and we put together a website, and we had how to do a reading instructions, top 10 reasons for opposing the war, downloadable logo, a downloadable press release that people could customize. And then we basically emailed everyone we knew. And we said to them, do you feel like war is a bad idea? Do you want to see if you can stop it? Do you at least want to give time for the UN weapons inspectors to do their work? And we hit send. And the next day, we started hearing from people all over the country. And I got a phone call from a woman in Iowa who had received 2 forwards of this email, one from Delaware and one from London.
Wow.
And things just kind of took off from there. And very early on, I emailed Susan Stamberg through the NPR website, because I'm a big Susan Stamberg fan. And I know her son is an actor and she loves theater. And I said, I want to let you in on the beginnings of what I think is a really great idea. And this was before we actually had anything going on. It's like chutzpah on my part. And so it was January 4th that I got the idea. It was a Sunday. That following Thursday, we launched the website. And Friday, I got a call from NPR. They wanted to interview us on All Things Considered the following week.
Oh, my goodness.
And by the time, so we scrambled, and by the time we got on All Things Considered and got interviewed by Michelle Norris, we had 6 readings all over the world.
Wow.
And things just kind of picked up from there. Yeah.
It just goes to show you that you can make a difference.
Oh.
You really, really can. And this was even before Facebook.
Oh, long before Facebook.
So there's certainly a way. Now, let's talk. You've also were the Outstanding Activist. You got the Outstanding Activist Award for the Vermont Environmental.
Well, what happened was right after Lysistrata Project, I wrote a play called The Accidental Activist about that whole experience. I toured that around the country for a while. And then I thought I wanted to write a new one-woman show. What issue would I like to tackle? And about that point, climate change started becoming a much more pervasive issue. This is about 2005. So, it hadn't permeated the public awareness yet. Al Gore's movie An Inconvenient Truth hadn't come out. But for those of us who were sort of on environmental newsletters and paying attention, it was starting to percolate through.
I see.
That screenplay that I'd been working on was intended to be some kind of environmental Lysistrata story. So I decided to take it and turn it into a one-woman show, because I figured that's what I knew how to do. And so I wrote a play called The Boycott, which is the story of the First Lady of the United States, the president's wife, launching a sex strike to combat global warming.
Oh, dear.
And I produced it in Burlington first, and then I was able to raise a whole bunch of money thanks to an angel donor. And I took it to New York for a 6-week off-Broadway run. And in the middle of all of that, the play won this Outstanding Activist Award from the Environmental Action Conference.
I see.
And that's where that's how that came about. And then I was able to tour it all over the country and take it over to Europe. And I took the show to Denmark in 2009 during those ill-fated climate talks in Copenhagen.
Oh, you did?
Yeah.
Now, you were telling me about the talks in Copenhagen, and
Yeah.
you said that you felt that there were things that were accomplished there.
I thought there was enormous an amount that was accomplished outside of the UN negotiations. What happened overall is that those talks were not intended to come up with any kind of final agreement. There's been a series of annual negotiations that happen that have been intended to replace the Kyoto Accords when they expire at the end of this year. So back in 2009, they were just sort of doing the next round of things. But I think because Obama had just gotten elected, and we thought that the obstructionism of the Bush regime and their close association with the fossil fuel industry would help move international negotiations forward. So they got very excited, and they invited all the world leaders to come in and have a conversation about climate change. And so I think there was kind of this massive expectation that we were going to come up with some kind of overarching solution. That's not what happened. And what the world agreed on is that we would allow the planet's average temperature to rise 2 degrees centigrade. That seems like a small number. The planet's average temperature right now has risen about 1 degree centigrade, and already we're seeing all the things that you talked about at the opening of the show. We're seeing extreme weather events. We're seeing record-setting temperatures. July in the United States was pretty much the hottest month in the history of months.
Really?
For as long as we've been keeping records, July exceeded all of our temperature records.
Wow.
We're seeing rising sea levels all over the world. There are low-lying Pacific Island nations like Tuvalu and Maldives that are already making plans to evacuate the entire country and move
Look at Bangladesh.
Bangladesh has been
Yeah.
having inundating, and even in Thailand, Bangkok, the capital of Thailand, has been having repeated floods so frequently that they're talking about needing to move the capital of Thailand.
Wow.
Because it's flooding too much. So what we saw during Sandy in New York, that's happening all the time in other parts of the world.
Mm-hmm.
And so I felt
And this was just so devastating here. You can imagine. I know our friends in Bangladesh. It happens every year there.
Yeah.
And yet we have no concept of this except hearing about it. And now we've witnessed it here.
We've seen there's been flooding in Pakistan that made what happened to us during Irene look like a little Trump through it.
And for us, Irene was huge.
Yeah, Irene was enormous, but there have been far more impactful events on areas of the world that have far fewer resources to respond to it.
Mm-hmm.
So right now there's an enormous typhoon happening, and people in the Pacific, the Pacific Rim, are suffering enormously, and we don't hear about it.
Mm.
But these things are going to start to impact us because there are going to be climate refugees from inundated areas all over the world. 20% of the United States lives on the coast. And as we're starting to see rising sea levels, we're looking at vast stretches of inhabited land right now that are going to become uninhabitable. And where are those people going to go? So there are a lot of questions that we have to start asking.
It's huge. And I know Audrey and Pat and Bob and I were down in the Rockaways after Sandy, and we also were in Staten Island. And the devastation there was so huge, you just can't imagine. And to see all these homes with the red and yellow stickers on their doors because you can't go in, or you can just go in to take out. It was absolutely unbelievable.
Yeah.
And, this is just the beginning, which is really, really
It is. And you asked sort of what the mechanism of what's going on is. And basically, we've been burning fossil fuels and emitting carbon dioxide and other greenhouse gases into the atmosphere. And it's a very simple science. It traps heat, much like your car warms up on a summer day when you keep the windows closed. And that increases the global average temperature. And we start to see transformation of our planetary systems. So it's not just weather. Vermont, for those of you who are gardeners, the USDA...
How many of you are gardeners?
Okay, so gardeners. The USDA has placed Vermont in a new hardiness zone now. We can grow things now that we haven't been able to grow in the past. Wow. We're seeing invasive species. We're seeing struggling industries like the maple syrup industry. Maple trees depend on certain climatic patterns in order to produce maple syrup. Yeah. And now that we see we're freezing later, we're warming up earlier, the freezing that we have isn't as solid. So like we had over this past week, it got very cold and then it got warm again. All of a sudden it's like October. And
the trees must be so confused.
Yeah.
Really, when you think about it.
So we're seeing, a slow migration of the maple syrup industry moving north into Canada because it's not sustainable in Vermont anymore. We're seeing disrupted agricultural patterns all over the world. When I was in Copenhagen, actually, I heard about traditional farmers from Bolivia who have been basing their agricultural practices on tried and true methods based on predictable agricultural patterns, and they can't predict the weather anymore. And or there are areas in Africa where they don't really have weather anymore. They've got drought and they've got flood, and that's it. So you can't really grow crops that way. Mm. So we're seeing disrupted agricultural patterns. We're seeing disrupted ecosystems. We're seeing one of the side effects of increasing amounts of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere is the oceans are absorbing a lot of that carbon dioxide, and the oceans are acidifying rapidly. So we're seeing a dramatic impact on coral reefs. Any carbon-based life form, when the oceans are acidifying, it starts to decompose. And so the oceans are being overfished. They're being rapidly polluted, but they're also being acidified. And so it's starting to break down the capacity of the food chains in the oceans. So we're seeing all of these environmental systems on which we depend unravel.
Which is so huge.
It's enormous, yeah. And there's no place in the world that remains unaffected by this. And in some places, it's a little bit milder than others right now. Like Vermont, we're fairly insulated from this. It's not like up in Alaska, where Native American communities have had to relocate because melting permafrost has caused settlements to crumble into the sea.
Wow.
Yeah. It's not like we're on the Gulf Coast of the United States, where insurance companies are starting to look at not insuring people living in areas that would be threatened by repeated extreme weather, by repeated hurricanes. So we're starting to have to, so we are in Vermont fairly fortunate, but we're still going to be seeing the impacts. And I spoke to a group of college students at Champlain College last week, and one of the kids said, well, why should I care about something that's happening to people halfway around the world?
Really?
And what I said was, well, because it's happening to all of us. And there's nowhere that we can go where
it's not happening.
Yeah, there's no planet B. There's no place to escape to.
So it is time for us to do something. Now, what can we do?
We can do a lot.
What can we do as individuals? I mean, what can each one of us do to make a difference with
Okay,
this?
so the first thing we have to do is acknowledge that it's happening. And we have to acknowledge the severity of the situation. We are right now blowing through a lot of tipping points set out by climate scientists that when we pass them, indicate that we are on track to runaway global climate catastrophe, basically, runaway climate change, where the planet heats up so dramatically, so fast, that our natural systems can't adapt. And a lot of times people ask the question, well, hasn't the planet been warmer in the past? And yes, it absolutely was warmer. But this has happened over an incredibly short span of time. We started burning fossil fuels about 150 years ago. So pre-industrial levels of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere were at about 250, 285 parts per million. And a part per million is about the equivalent to a drop of water in a gas tank. Wow. So it's not much. So now we're 390 parts per million, and this is what we're seeing. This is 1 degree temperature rise. So when the international agreements say we'll allow the planet to heat up to 2 degrees more, we can see things are already getting catastrophic. So, but we've done it in 150 years, as opposed to over the course of thousands, hundreds of thousands, millions of years. Or when there's something large and catastrophic, like 65 million years ago when a big asteroid hits the Earth, what happened? Mass extinction. And that's what we're facing right now. No. So I think we need to acknowledge the tremendous scope of what we're facing, because if we can't say to ourselves, we are threatening the capacity of this planet to be a healthy, happy home for us, we can't respond in a way that meets the scale of the problem. So we have to take a moment to let that holy cow moment sort of run through our body, run through our emotional life. We have to let the ice water run through our veins or our stomach hit the floor. Whatever happens to us, I don't know if any of you have experienced those moments. It's like when someone you care about gets a diagnosis of a terminal illness, I think, or when you yourself get a piece of really catastrophic news, and it kind of knocks you to the floor for a little bit. Yeah. That's what's happening to people as they start to recognize the scope of the problem. And that's healthy and it's important. So we need to allow ourselves to take that in, and we need to support each other as we're starting to recognize the scale and magnitude of the crisis that we're facing. And then we need to step up and do something about it. But I think, Joanna Macy has done a lot of work around grief. You look at the 7 stages of dealing with grief, or 5, 12, whatever, how many stages it is. You need to allow yourself to process it.
Yeah, it has to be processed. And I think too, we all care about our children, and we talk about what we want to do for our children, and we don't want to leave them with the deficit and with all of these other things. But we have to think about what we're doing to the world that we live in, the earth that we live in, and what we're doing for them, and how are we preparing it, making it better for them. Yeah,
so we have to figure out a way to reduce our carbon footprint dramatically. We have to stop burning fossil fuels as fast as we can. And in the intermediary time, we have to use whatever resources we've got to help us build an infrastructure for the future. We can, we have to figure out a way. Hopefully, this is my great prayer, is that some scientists will figure out how to extract carbon dioxide and methane and other greenhouse gases from the atmosphere. But that's not happening anytime soon. So we have to look at transforming pretty much all of our systems, because we are a culture in the West, in all the developed world, that has basically taken fossil fuels and massaged them into every aspect of our existence. So if you look at our agricultural systems, how do we get our food? We have giant factory farms that are operated by giant machinery using fossil fuels. And then all of the chemicals that are used to grow our crops and fight off, our fertilizers and pesticides are all based on fossil fuels. And that massive agricultural infrastructure, the impact is huge from a fossil fuel perspective. It also destroys topsoil. It poisons groundwater. And when you have massive drought, like we did this summer, over a vast swath of the agricultural portion of the country, all of a sudden food prices go up.
Yeah. And when you saw all the corn, did you see this on television? You could see all of these cornfields, and they were just dried up.
Right.
And it was just beyond belief.
When you have thousands of acres of monocropping like that, it's not resilient to giant impacts, enormous weather. So there's something that's happening a lot in Vermont right now, is we're rediscovering small-scale agriculture. We're rebuilding our network of organic farms. We're rebuilding our network of multi-purposed farms. So again, you don't have people growing thousands of acres of one thing. Yeah. You have small-scale farms that have diversified and that are more resilient to systemic impact.
And they are trying to do this in the Midwest as well. On 60 Minutes, they were showing these little farms coming together and trying to do that.
And farmers are incredibly creative. They have to deal with impact all the time.
Sure.
But a small-scale farm like that, and networks of small-scale farms, and local food production mean that we're not dependent on shipping our food halfway around the world. You can go to the store and you can buy apples from New Zealand. You can get produce from Chile. That's kind of exciting. But again, what is the carbon footprint of that asparagus that you got from Chile? Because you got it out of season and it had to get shipped thousands and thousands of miles. Exactly. So looking at bolstering our local food system is an incredibly important way to go.
Now, I just want to, are there any questions? We're putting out a lot of information here, and I want you all to be a part of this. Are there any questions for Kathryn? Betsy. Do
you want me to take?
Oh, of course.
Give her the microphone.
That would help, wouldn't it?
Perhaps. Kathryn, thank you so much for being here. And it's exciting to know that you're in Vermont and leading this charge with many other Vermonters, Bill McKibben being one of them. And I just had the chance to see a preview before Ken Burns' latest Dust Bowl came out.
Oh, wow.
And it was during the time he showed it up at Dartmouth, which he does very kindly when he has a new film. And it was just before or just during all the drought. And it was just exactly what you were talking about. And that was a long time ago. And it had to do with our agriculture and what we were doing. And I thought, I can't believe the timing of this. Yeah. And I'm wondering, are you working also with other Vermonters and other organizations? I'm thinking of things like Act 350, or not Act 350, 350.org.
Oh, 350, yes.
That's what it is, 350.org.
Yeah.
And I'm hoping that you will continue telling us what we can do here.
Absolutely.
Because hearing Bill McKibben many, many years ago, we were just talking earlier about the changes in Vermont, and I'm a skier. I love to ski, and we may not even have any of that.
It's getting harder.
In addition to not even being able to eat or have a planet.
Right.
So I'd love to hear more about who else you're working with. Too,
yeah, absolutely.
And what we can do. Thank you.
So 350.org is an international climate action group founded by climate writer Bill McKibben, who happens to live in Ripton. He wrote the first book about 25 years ago on climate change called The End of Nature. And I remember when that book came out, I was living in Seattle, and the weekly paper did a story about it. And they did a whole sidebar about what Seattle would look like under 20 feet of water. And I thought, wow, I don't want to live to see that. And it was the first time I didn't want to live forever, because I was 20, and you do at that point. And here I am 25 years later, and I'm living to see it. Yeah. And so Bill started this group 350 after climate scientist from NASA, James Hansen, came out with a report saying that the maximum allowable amount of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere that will let us have a safe, healthy planet is 350 parts per million. So that's where that number came from. And they got rolling actually right before those climate talks in Copenhagen. And they've managed to have enormous annual events all around the world in every country but North Korea, highlighting global awareness and a global desire for action. Well, because we're in Vermont and we are forward thinking, Vermont has the first.
And we are, aren't we?
We are. Vermont has the first statewide 350 chapter. So we have 350 Vermont. 350 Vermont is working on a lot of different things. We get into the State House and we help bolster climate legislation in the State House. Vermont, we're so fortunate in so many ways. We have a governor willing to shout climate change from the rooftops. We have a legislature which absolutely understands climate change and trying to put forth really strong climate legislation. We've got Ginny Lyons in the Senate, Tony Klein in the House, and we have a comprehensive state energy plan which is looking at trying to achieve 90% renewables by 2050. And I just attended a conference, the Vermont Energy and Climate Action Network conference last weekend, and it was full of 200-300 people who are on their town energy committees, who are energy professionals, passionate, wonky, devoted people who are all working to try to help Vermont achieve these incredibly ambitious goals. And so 350 is working in the legislature to try to help bolster the climate legislation. We are jumping on board the International 350's latest campaign, which is an attempt to divest from the fossil fuel industry. Because what we've come to understand is that the fossil fuel industry really is the enemy of the healthy planet. Their business model demands that they burn all of their reserves of fossil fuel, which take us far beyond 2 degrees, takes us far beyond 4 degrees. Basically, we could burn fossil fuels for another 14 years or so and hit that 2-degree mark. But the fossil fuel reserves that they have are about 5 times that. And their business models demand that they burn everything that they've got.
Now, what happens when we reach that 2%?
Well, it's 2 degrees.
I mean, 2
yeah.
degrees.
Well, we've seen 1 degree rise already, right? And we already seeing climatic weather events, gigantic weather events. We're seeing drought. We're seeing flood. We're seing those 100-year fires out in California happening 2 and 3 times a season. So I would say double it, but I think it's not a linear scale. It's an exponential scale. So we're seeing global climate catastrophe. We're seeing the planet start to be rendered uninhabitable. We're seeing dismantling of our social networks and our civilization. And I hate to be catastrophic about it. I hate to sound like a Hollywood movie, but if you listen to the science, this is what they're predicting.
So now you also are doing something about hope.
Yes, absolutely.
So let's talk about hope.
Right. Well, and
I want to hear the good news.
Absolutely. But I do want to say the other thing that 350 Vermont is working on right now, along with this divestment from the fossil fuel industry campaign, and if you're an alumni of any university, get on board with trying to get your university to divest. Also, there are pipelines leading from the tar sands in Canada down through the United States. And we're trying to fight the completion of those tar sand pipelines. There is a pipeline right now, the Trailbreaker pipeline, that runs from the port in Portland, Maine, up into Canada. And it takes imported oil north. They want to reverse the flow of that pipeline to take tar sands oil, which is incredibly corrosive and destructive, down south through the pipeline to Maine. And a portion of that pipeline runs through the Northeast Kingdom. And this is a 65-year-old pipeline that was not intended to take this highly corrosive, toxic form of fossil fuel. So if they send tar sands oil down through that pipeline, you're pretty much guaranteed a spill. So 350 Vermont is working to fight off the tar sands.
Now that's something that I wasn't aware of until I looked
It's
at the website.
just coming out right now. They just applied for a permit to reverse the flow. So 350 Vermont is getting on board and ramping up campaigns, and 350 New England. There are now 350 groups in Massachusetts and Maine and New Hampshire, and all working together to try to prevent this from happening.
And we can.
We can. We
Something
absolutely
can be done. And
can.
this is something where all of us can come be. Oh.
Am I holding this properly?
I think so.
There's a young man, Tim McChristiansen, who bid on...
Tim DeChristopher, yes.
Tim DeChristopher,
yeah.
Sorry. To bid on 22,000 acres in Utah to save the mountains.
Wilderness, yeah.
The wilderness. He did not have the $1.2 million to pay for to purchase this land.
Right.
And the idea that he did this is just so amazing. I'm just consumed by it. So it really has gotten. I'm now really very much interested in everything you have to say.
Yeah.
Kathryn is brilliant.
Well, that was a heroic act of civil disobedience.
Yes.
Because that was an illegal sale of leases on oil for oil and gas exploration.
Yes.
And so he got in there and he ramped up the bidding so much that it exploded the event. It basically prevented them from selling anything else, and he went to prison
Yes.
for
And
this.
excuse me.
Yeah.
There's a movie that was shown in town recently, and I think Transition Town Manchester is going to show it again, called Bidder 70, Bidder.
Yeah.
It really, we all have to see it.
Yeah.
Again and again and again. It's really important.
And I'm glad you mentioned Transition Town Manchester, because
Yes.
if you're looking for hope, the
Oh.
Transition Town movement is a remarkable movement, and that's another thing that I'm involved with.
One
There are
more
many
thing.
things I can tick them off. You haven't even looked at your card yet.
Yeah, I know.
The Transition Town movement got started, I don't know, half a dozen years ago in the United Kingdom. A group of permaculture farmers, basically activists, people who were very interested in building resilience in agricultural systems, looked at the realities of climate change and peak oil, and they said, how do we help our communities reduce our carbon footprint and increase our resilience to the systemic shocks that are going to come down the pike, whether they're climatic, whether they're weather-related, whether they're political or cultural. And they started developing a methodology for relocalization. And that's what they saw was the most powerful thing that they could do. So relocalizing agricultural systems, relocalizing energy production, not only relocalizing it, but having locally owned energy production, relocalizing economies, coming up with local currencies, and building a level of resilience into the community that would allow everyone who lives in that community, regardless of their socioeconomic level, regardless of what they've been up to in the past, to move forward into a post-carbon world in a really healthy way. And what they do is they build a lot of community awareness. They show movies and they have talks and they do workshops. And then they create an event called a Great Unleashing, which is about getting, and in fact, Transition Town, Charlotte, where I live, we had our Great Unleashing a couple of weeks ago. And it's about bringing the whole community together to ask the question, given the realities of climate change and peak oil, which is another issue that we're not even talking about yet, given the need to reduce our carbon footprint and increase our resilience, how do we engage all of these local systems to build a process of relocalization that takes us on a path to a healthy and sustainable future? And what does that look like? And how do we paint a picture of that now, of what that future looks like, so that we have something really positive to work towards, rather than just having big, scary stuff to run from? And they build working groups, and they have just an incredible amount of vibrant activity going on. And Transition Town Manchester, Brattleboro, they're doing amazing work. Putney, there's a transition group in Hardwick and Montpelier and Charlotte. And they're all of these local community groups working to address all of these issues. So the questions in Charlotte are, how do we increase our local food production? How do we, it's a very suburban community. How do we get out of our cars? How do we increase local transportation? And how do we work with other communities around the state to build networks?
And it really is kind of exciting when you think about it.
It's very exciting.
There really are things that we can do.
Yeah.
Hi, Sally. Hi, Kathryn. Thank you for coming. I think there are a lot of positive things going on, and it is exciting to see those things. And I think I definitely agree with you. Making others aware is one of our biggest things, and acceptance. I even have sometimes a hard time acceptance because I like our old familiar lifestyle. But I think today I'd like to see you maybe address or answer or help us is it's hard for us, I think, when we're so familiar with a particular lifestyle to want to give that up. And that has a direct influence upon our own personal carbon footprint. And I'm going to jump here for a second in terms of a thought with Sandy, having grown up in, one of the most populated counties in America, Bergen County in New Jersey, and spending my time on the Jersey Shore and seeing the houses grow and grow and grow right along the coastline, as well as maybe building places where we maybe even knew 30, 40, 50 years ago we should not have built. What I guess I'd like to see is the addressing of how can we as, and I think I'm going to probably answer my own question in certain senses, maybe getting involved in our legislations and governments where you hear people say, well, we're going to build it right back and we're going to, put that house right where it was before, where perhaps that house shouldn't have been there in the first place.
Right.
So I was just wondering if you could address those kinds of things and where can we really, if I can use the word, put our
Our energy.
our money where our mouth is
Yeah,
or whatever.
yeah.
And because I know also, and if I may, just one other thought is, even though it doesn't make a huge difference, but sometimes it really does, even by maybe trying to reduce something as small as, for instance, myself, I refuse to buy laundry detergent in anything but a cardboard container, or if I do use liquid, I'll go down and refill it at a co-op or something of the sort. Even those are small differences, but again, by the transition.org community involvement, perhaps with enough community involvement of really sharing with our neighbor what are the small things that you can do, and that will maybe help on a bigger scale.
Right. Yes, absolutely.
Yeah, that's so important. I think the things that each one of us can do to make a difference, and also that we can teach our youth to do. And I think that's a very, very big area that I want you to talk about, is what we can do to teach our children, because this is their world, and we need to teach them and let them know about this.
Absolutely. And I think what's exciting about what you said is that there's room for everybody at every level of interest and engagement. So part of what you're talking about is changing zoning laws and allowing and changing how community development and growth happens. And there's a group called Smart Growth Vermont they've been wrapped into Vermont Natural Resources Council, but their primary focus has been, how do we concentrate development in the center of communities to make them more walkable and more livable? So if you're a kind of wonky person who really loves the details of zoning regulations, there are absolutely ways to get involved. If you're more teach your children well kind of person, there are lots of daily behaviors and habits that we can, and I'll address this in a second, that we can teach people. But it doesn't matter. The best part is that because climate change and these issues of moving away from fossil fuels affect every aspect of our lives, you can start with exactly where you are and what you care about. So if you're a gardener, if you're a clothing designer, if you are interested in alternative medicine, there's no aspect of our lives which won't be touched by this. So you can take wherever you are, whatever your inherent genius is, whatever your wisdom and your life experience, and you can apply it directly to that, as opposed to feeling like you need to
go out there and do something.
Exactly. Go out something.
Exactly.
There are people who love to be oppositional and go out and march in the streets and hold up placards and yell and scream and have giant protests, and that's fantastic. There are other people who like to write legislation. There are other people who like to talk to their neighbors and have potlucks and show films in their living rooms. And for whatever your particular avenue of approach is, for me, I like to write plays and perform them. And that's a big part of what I do, because that's fun. And I like to organize people to make positive change. So you asked about hope, and so I'll address that, and then we'll get to the what can people do,
because we need to look
right.
at this.
Look, okay.
We're moving right along.
I think the idea, it's just important to remember that we're not alone, and that there are people.
That. You are never alone,
right? And there are people all over the world working to resolve these issues.
Yeah.
There's an incredible economist named Paul Hawken who wrote a book called Blessed Unrest, and he wrote it because he gives talks all over the world, and people always come up afterwards and hand him their business card. And he would take the cards, and it was always a business card of some little nonprofit that was working to do good in the world. And he would take them and he'd just stick them in a drawer. And one day he opened the drawer, and it was bursting with cards. And he gave this incredible commencement address at the University of Portland a few years ago, and you can Google this, Paul Hawken, commencement address, University of Portland. But he basically said, if you look at the data, the hard, raw data around climate change and ecosystem destruction and all that kind of horrible stuff, and you're not pessimistic, you haven't understood the data. But if you look at all the people all around the world who are working to restore the environment and take care of the poor and make the world a better place, and you're not optimistic, you don't have a pulse. And I think
that's true. It's true, because
both narratives are true. And the question becomes, which narrative do we choose to focus on? And Joanna Macy just came out with a great book called Active Hope. And it's really all about the sense of we can't have naive hope. We can't have pie in the sky, unicorns, and fairy dust. Oh, it'll all just be better hope. It's going to get rugged. But we are creatures of tremendous creativity and capacity, and we can have hope in each other.
We always come to the fore when we need to. When things get to the point that something has to be done. I mean, look at what's happening after Hurricane Sandy and,
Yeah.
and how people all come together and do amazing things for each other. So it can be done.
It can be done, and it's going to be a lot of work and a lot of battles and I think there is going to be a lot of suffering, but we can alleviate a lot of that suffering. And we can we can keep our eyes on the prize, as they said in the civil rights movement, to hold out not just hope, but a vision and a game plan for how we get from here to there.
Right.
And that's incredibly possible.
Now let's
so
talk-
what can people do on an individual level? You want to get around to that. You can start in your own home. You can start in your kitchen. That's probably the best place to start. Look at your cleaning supplies. You can switch over to baking soda and vinegar for most of your cleaning needs. And these are all things that you can Google. Both personal, cleaning products and what you can clean your home with. You probably had a grandmother who took vinegar and water and newspaper and cleaned the windows beautifully. Organic, local food, very, very important. Energy efficiency and conservation.
Skin cream, aloe.
Aloe is great.
Aloe plants, the best in the world.
Sesame oil is great. You don't have to buy expensive skincare products, and there are local producers who are making all of these things. So if you want something, rose oil and all that kind of stuff, there are local producers of this. So buy locally. That's a huge piece of bolstering the local economy. Efficiency and conservation in Vermont is huge, and we have a lot of support for that. We have the nation's first efficiency utility. And so changing your light bulbs does make a colossal difference. Putting all of your appliances on power strips and turning things off when you're not using them. Insulating your home. You can get solar hot water now that will pay itself back. You can get solar panels for solar electricity that can feed back into the grid. Supporting community energy projects is vital. And I know wind is really, really controversial in Vermont right now. And part of the challenge, I think, has been that these big externally owned wind projects have come and been imposed on communities that didn't feel like they had a say and didn't feel like they were benefiting from it. The challenge is that we are an energy-hungry people, and efficiency and conservation can't make up for all of our energy needs. So where's it going to come from? Solar is phenomenal, but it can't produce the quantities of energy that wind can produce. And wind produces far more the taller your wind towers are. So we need large-scale wind projects to make up for what we demand. So when you're having conversations with communities about this, the question becomes, how can the latest wind project be locally owned? How can it be cited respectfully? But how can we acknowledge the fact, that question of what are we willing to give up? How much of our lifestyle are we committed to maintaining? There was a community out in Kansas that was threatened with a coal-fired power plant that was going to be built. And a woman who worked at the University of Kansas said, absolutely not. We're going to implement so many conservation and efficiency projects in our community that we're going to alleviate the need for a power plant. And they did it.
Really?
So I think as we're having these conversations, we need to ask each other, how do we reduce our energy consumption? And then what can we replace what's left over with?
Now, we need to talk about our youth.
Yes.
A little bit about our youth.
Our
What are you
youth.
doing with the children?
What am I doing with the children? Well, last spring, I helped design and launch an intertown energy competition called Vermontivate. And it was about getting people in their communities to take on energy challenges, and they would earn points on behalf of their town. And then the big epic grand prize was the winning town would get an ice cream party from Ben & Jerry's. And we played for 5 weeks from mid-May to mid-June, and we had people of all ages playing. We had a daycare facility in Brattleboro, kids ages 3 to 7 playing with their teachers. We had high school students playing in their community. We had people who were retired playing, and they had a fantastic time. Everybody had a blast. We had people who'd never changed a light bulb before. We had people who were energy professionals all playing. And Montpelier won at the very end of the game by the skin of their teeth, an 11th hour victory. We're going to be ramping this up again next spring. And our goal is to have, it was beta test, we had 12 towns playing, we had about 200 players on the site. We want every town in Vermont to play, and we want every age group to play. And the thing about kids is that they're geniuses.
Oh, they are.
And
just ask them.
Exactly. They're a group of African teenagers just figured out how to power a generator with human urine. There is a kid in the United States who just figured out, he created a process of medical diagnosis, and I forget what he was working on. But basically, this 15-year-old kid figured out how to use carbon nanotubes to create a form of diagnosis that it was a problem that modern medicine hadn't been able to solve. So I say, turn it over to the kids. Kids like challenges. They like games. And if you look at the young people in your community and the amount of time they're spending on Xbox and playing video games, tell them, all right, we've got something even more powerful and exciting than this fake challenge that you're facing with the epic win you're trying to achieve. We're trying to save the planet here. What can you do? And they will, I would imagine, if you frame it like that this is the most exciting, high stakes challenge that they could ever engage in, because it's their future.
It's their world.
It's their world. It's their planet.
Absolutely.
And what I'm going to start to tell kids, and I wrote about this for a VPR commentary actually, is I think they should boycott school until their science projects are all about getting CO2 out of the atmosphere and all about green energy. I think they should refuse to learn what they're being taught unless what they're being taught is relevant to helping them build a positive and healthy future on the planet.
Interesting.
And that also includes a form of reskilling. And this is something Transition talks a lot about. When we don't have as much power, when we don't have the tools that we have now, what are we going to need to know how to do? Tool sharpening, knowing how to use a scythe, knowing how to raise goats. What are they having them ask? What do we need to know in order to survive in a world that is not going to look anything like what this world looks like right now, and demand to be taught that? And I think they have every right to boycott classes, just like I think college students right now have a right to boycott classes until their universities divest from the fossil fuel industry. Because how can a university divest in an industry that is dismantling the planet and is going to leave their graduates no place to live and no way to earn a living? And the universities, of course, status quo will say, well, it's hard. It's going to be challenging. We don't know if we want to do this. And of course they're going to say that.
And you can put it off and put it off and put it off.
But there's no more time to put it off.
Kathryn, we could go on forever.
I told you.
This is
I know you wouldn't have to worry about it.
absolutely unbelievable. Does anyone have any questions? I mean, we've covered so much.
I just wanted to say that I went to Green Mountain College many, many years ago when it was just this dinky little 2-year girls' school. But that school has really come online and have done a great job, not only with their own environmental things that they've done, but also with teaching people to farm on a small scale basis. Just wanted to put that plug in.
Yeah, more stuff you can do.
Is wonderful.
Plant gardens, reduce your driving, advocate for public transportation, help your communities change their help the people in your community who want to insulate their homes. There are so many opportunities through Efficiency Vermont, through Vermont Energy Investment Corporation. Hold workshops. And if you don't know what to do, there are people out there who do. 350 Vermont, Transition Towns, so many experts in the community. Call me. I'll come in. I'll hold a green living workshop.
Kathryn's, yes.
Totally happy to do it. And keep a lookout for Vermontivate, because that's going to be in a massive movement in Vermont.
of you out there, thank you for joining me. And for all of you here, thank you for being here. And until the next time, let's talk.
Thank you.